Let's talk about misalignment traps. These are traps that result in you not having the same perception as the other person or them fooling themselves in some way. And if you don't fix this, it's going to blow up later. Let's take a look.
There are some cases where you may lead a person or mislead a person to think something untrue, willingly or not. And in every single case, this will come back to bite you later. Because just like any other problem, if it's ignored, it's going to grow and fester. It may be something that you promised and that you know is just not going to come true, or having agreed to something hastily just to close the topic that is not exactly what you can deliver. But regardless, all of these decisions will come back to haunt you later. There are three main traps of this type that you should look out for here. The first is misaligned expectations. By this I mean, you think that one thing will happen, but the person thinks that another thing will. Maybe it's a client that thinks that you're going to get a refund because others in the same situation have, and you don't bother to correct them. Or you're a manager telling a subordinate that this type of work gets them promoted, and now they're thinking that it will, but you know very well that it's not that simple. The second type is hurrying an issue. When a situation is too awkward or tense, you simply agree to things that you otherwise wouldn't just to get it out of the way. For example, as a manager, saying something like, "Yes, I'm sure you'll get rewarded for the project later, just do it now." And later, they don't. Or a third type, which is you actually making a false promise. You tell someone to their face that they're going to get something that you know very well that they never will. The problem with all of these is that you're avoiding a current small problem in the present by kicking it down to the future, either to make someone accept something more easily or just to hurry up an issue and avoid the tension. But either way, you are causing a massive problem down the road. And as we saw, for any type of problem, letting it grow will only make it worse, because the person is going to pile on more and more expectations and assumptions based on what you said as time goes by. So when you wait to have the conflict later, it's going to hit much harder, and the rift in terms of alignment will only grow much bigger. The common issue behind this is that many times we say what we don't mean in order to kill the tension. For example, you're sitting with someone important, a client, a manager, a subordinate, and you know what you have to say, but sometimes you just don't have the courage to say no, especially when the other person has status or authority. This is, for example, the subordinate that is asked to participate in a project that they know is going to be massive overtime work and that is going to do nothing for them. Under normal conditions, they would refuse. But in the heat of the moment, with the boss looking them in the face, they just say, "Sure," and now you are in a prison of your own making. But therefore, the solution is simple as well. It's to gently persist with your point, regardless of how tense or difficult the situation may be. You need to have that capability to look the person in the eyes, no matter how important, no matter how intense, and hold that tension and not break it when the other person insists. In short, especially with important people, you will have an immediate reflex of killing the tension when the other person insists. Lose that reflex. Don't kill the tension. It's that simple. What are some implementation pointers in terms of avoiding these misalignment traps? The first is that the more difficult the situation, the more important that this actually is. When someone is trying to extract a big promise from you versus a small one, or when it's someone of authority versus someone that's an equal, the difficulty level will be much higher. But so is the potential for you losing a lot more. Therefore, the more difficult that things are, and the more that you think that you can't do it, the more important it is for you not to give in. Then, this comes down to being honest, to not misleading others, but also, even if you were not the one to do it, if the person is misleading themselves, to still intervene and correct them, despite how hard and awkward this conversation may be. This will involve some hard truths. Being honest and adjusting someone's expectations may make them disappointed or angry, but the alternative is them becoming even angrier and more disappointed when this explodes. And finally, focus on corrections, on every little detail. Even when people agree on the big picture, they may disagree on the details, or the time frame, or many other specificities. Try to uncover what they think and correct them when they're not being reasonable. What are some do's and don'ts in terms of misalignment? Do's. Do make it a point to always check with a person whether they understand and agree with something. Make this a constant practice so that you never have an unpleasant surprise. Don'ts. Don't think that the other person is fully responsible for what they think, because if they have the wrong expectation and you know this and you didn't correct them, you're just as guilty. What are some examples of traps that cause misalignment? The first is someone getting fired. When the manager is trying to negotiate the terms, they're too nice and they end up promising things that they can't deliver on, such as that they'll pay their full salary or something similar for a couple of months, and then they can't. And this type of situation always blows up. Another one is heretics in a company. What I mean is, when someone disbelieves their manager and openly confronts them on everything, casting doubt and poisoning others, if the manager doesn't tell them the truth, which is that they have to go now, but instead lies or sugarcoats it, telling them that they can stay just to kill the tension, this usually ends up becoming very ugly. And finally, promises made to friends are another example. It may be the case that a friend is feeling down and you promise them something, to go out with them or a similar activity, when you know full well that you're not going to do it later. And then this becomes even much more of a letdown. What are our key takeaways here? The first is that there are always three main ways to spark misalignment: having different expectations, hurrying the issue, or actively promising false things. Remember, this will always come back to bite you later. People will take your words seriously and they'll draw conclusions and assumptions based on them. So you're avoiding a small problem now that is going to become much bigger later. And finally, misleading can take many forms, active and passive. You can actively lead someone to believe something different from reality, or simply not correct them when they do believe it themselves. But it's the same thing at the end of the day.
So as you see, there are multiple things that can happen in terms of misalignment traps, from just lying or not correcting someone's wrong impression when they have it. And if these are not fixed immediately, there's going to be a bigger confrontation later on, because those expectations are going to snowball on both sides.